Hi there guys, so this is the Benjamin Akela. It's the latest addition to the little collection that we're building up, and one that I thought would make a really good video series for YouTube. So the plan for this particular rifle is to see how good we can make it. For a little while now people have been asking on the channel for a more sort of budget orientated rifle. So for a little while now I've been on the lookout for one in the sort of 400 to 600 price range. The Akela does come in at the very top end of that, so this rifle itself now I paid £600 for, but I'm quite happy with my purchase. And I'll explain exactly why I chose the Akela in a minute. I'm not going to be doing a super detailed overview, there's plenty of those already on YouTube. And the RFD that I bought this from, Big Dan's Airguns, already has a really good overview slash review of the rifle. So if there's any information you need for the UK version, that's the video to watch. And I would highly recommend Big Dan as an RFD. He knows his stuff, he's easy to deal with, and if you're looking at one of these rifles, I think he does have the lowest price at the moment. Right then, so I'll just give you some general information on my findings with the rifle. So my particular rifle is a 177, and from a 3000 PSI fill I got around 4 magazines worth of pellets. You do get 2 magazines with the rifle and they are 14 shots each. So that works out to be about 56 shots at a usable power level. The 2.2 version you'll obviously get more shots, as it uses less air to get the pellet up the barrel. And this one, straight out the box, was doing about 11.7 foot-pounds with JSB heavies. These rifles are unregulated, so you do have a little bit of a power curve. In the 177 I found it's a sort of linear drop in power as time goes on. But I have already got the lane regulator that I'll be putting in this rifle. I'll do a full strip down of the rifle and a fitting of the regulator on the channel, and that'll be coming in the near future. And the accuracy out the box wasn't too bad either. Perfectly good at 25 to 30 yards. The groups did start to open out a little at 50, but you got to remember this is a budget end rifle. So it's not necessarily going to have a match grade barrel and be laser accurate straight out the box at 50 yards. I do quite like the rifle, so I'm really hoping we can get it laser accurate at 50 yards, and whatever we end up doing to the rifle I will show on the channel. I have got a little bit of shooting footage that I'll show you in a minute, but I briefly want to talk about why I chose the Akela over some of the other brands out there. So the first reason is I really like the stock. It's very Wildcat-esque, and it does shoulder quite nicely. The length of pull is just right. The grip is a little thin, but I do have that problem with most guns, so it might just be my hands. And overall it's quite a nice looking rifle. The shrouded barrel finishes the end off quite nicely, and it's overall quite a well proportioned little rifle. The next reason is the monoblock design. Now the Akela is quite similar to other monoblock rifles like the Theoben Rapid and the Crown, in that most of the mechanism is held directly in the block back here. Being a bullpup, it does have a reach forward trigger, but that's common in a lot of bullpups. So the main advantages of having a monoblock is that it's more robust, easier to work on, and being a monoblock there is less seals, so obviously less areas for the rifle to leak. And the final reason why I chose this rifle in particular is it just feels like a quality piece of kit. No play in the cocking arm, the cocking feels nice. I have improved it a little bit by polishing the hammer, but out of the box it wasn't terrible to begin with. There's no rattles, no loose parts, and overall I'm really quite happy with it. And even the stock on this particular rifle is an exceptionally nice piece of walnut. Lots of grain and nice bits in the wood, so I think with an oil up that's going to come out really nice. I can't promise they're all going to be like that, but this wasn't a special order. It did just come out the box looking this nice. So there are a couple other rifles in this category that I could have chosen, and I'll just give a brief explanation as to why I didn't choose them. So number one is the Artemis P15, and the reason I didn't choose that one is that I think it's a bit overpriced for what it is. I think they're currently retailing for around the £530 mark, so they're a little cheaper than the Benjamin Akela, but having shouldered one it's not as nice to shoulder. Also, the quality of the actual rifle isn't as good. Now I have not taken one apart personally, but I have first hand seen some of the components that have come out of a P15, and to say they were a little rough is an understatement. And the last thing that put me off about the P15 is the amount the price has increased. I can remember when they sort of first came out they were around the £300 mark, and to see that the rifle hasn't really changed and the price has nearly doubled put me off a little. The other rifle I considered is one of the Crowd bullpups, either the Breaker or the MP2. Both seemed like nice rifles and they were on the lower side of the budget, but there are already quite a few videos on the Crowds and I wanted to do something a little different. Right then, so we're set up in Pete's and this is the 25 yard target. and as you'll see, straight out of the box it's doing pretty well. So what we did was we shot it straight out the box directly as it came from Big Dan, and then the next week we took the rifle down the range after we'd done a few little improvements to it, and you're going to see the difference between the two groups. So we did a few things inside the rifle, but the main ones were give the barrel a little polish, removed all the old grease and oil, then put some new stuff back in it. I did recently do a video on lubricants for the air rifles, but I will be covering the Akela more specifically in a future video. Right then, so now we're at 50, and as you can see the groups do open up a little bit. They're not amazing groups at 50, although you wouldn't really expect it out of a budget rifle, but I was reasonably happy with the results we were getting at 50 yards. Now the one thing I did notice is that there are quite a few flaws in the 50 yard groups, which generally mean that the barrel wants looking at. Now this hunch was right, and we did have to remove a burr on the inside of the transfer port, which I'll talk a little more about later. And then once we removed that burr, the next week we came down, the rifle was much more consistent accuracy wise. And here's the rebuild groups. 30 yards, I'm really quite happy with the results. So it just goes to show a little patience and a little bit of work really can make the difference with these rifles. And we see the same at 50 yards. 50 yards still opens out a little more, so we will be doing more work to the barrel in the future. There's obviously a little more polishing to do, but I'm sure we'll get it shooting really quite well. And even at 50 yards I've seen a lot more expensive rifles do much worse groups than that. So in this little series I'll definitely be showing me making some hammer spring guides, a little more polishing on the barrel, and just some general things that need to happen inside the block to make it a little better. I'm hoping to show you everything with this rifle, so you'll see some machining, a bit of tuning, and overall just everything we do to make this rifle as good as it can be. Okay then, so that was the results of a little fettling and a little tinkering inside. As I said before, I will be showing you exactly what I did inside the rifle, and we purposefully didn't use the lathe or the milling machine when we did any of those things. We used hand tools, sort of sandpaper, and the Dremel, although you could probably use a cordless drill. And just doing those things really improved the way the rifle shot. So here we see the before and after. This is the before, this is the after of the 25 or 30 yard test. The first one I did at 25 yards, the second one I did at 30. So as you saw in the video, we did get some quite nice groups at 25 yards. However, the one thing I did notice was that the groupings weren't that consistent. You'd get sort of a really nice set of groupings, then the next one would be a little spread out again, then it'd go to good groupings again, it'd just sort of go back and forward. Once we've done the work on the barrel, we see that the groupings are much more consistent, and I'm really quite happy with these at 30 yards. And all of them, with the exception of this one here, because of the flyer, and this one here are well under a 5p piece. So that's a really good start. So here are the results at 50. And again, as I said before, the groups do open up a bit at 50, but you got to remember this is sort of a more budget orientated rifle. I'm hoping with a little more work to the barrel and a little more work inside the block, we can really get this rifle performing at 50 yards as well. But here's the before. Obviously we did have one good group here, and the rests aren't terrible if I'm honest. But the after are much better. Groupings are much more consistent, and I'm confident with a little more work we can eliminate the flyers. I'll be showing everything we do to the rifle on the channel. Right then, with that all out of the way, what I thought I'd do is give you my final honest thoughts on the rifle. So the main question that's probably going to be asked is it worth the £600? And my answer to that is yes. I think for £600 it's quite a good little package. There are other rifles out there that are going to be cheaper. However, I'm quite glad I spent my money on this rifle. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and there are a few things that I don't like about the rifle which I'll get into in a little bit, but I think it's about the right money for what it is. It's not underpriced, it's not overpriced, it's about the right money. And it quite nicely bridges the gap between the lower end rifles such as the Kraus, the Artemises, and those sort of rifles, and the higher end rifles such as the Wildcat, the HW100 bullpup, and sort of the air-armed Galahad. All those rifles are over £1,000, so for £600 I think you do get quite a nice rifle. If I'm honest, with this being an unregulated gun, you do have to add a little more on for the regulator, as in my opinion, nowadays I really can't see myself running an unregulated rifle. The regulator just makes tuning that much easier, and you don't have to faff around with sweet spots and specific fill pressures. Okay then, so we'll talk about some of the negatives of the rifle. So the first one, and probably the most serious one for me, was the position of the cheek piece in relation to the scope rail. This is one of the things I noticed quite early on when looking at the rifle, but it wasn't until I mounted a scope that I noticed the scale of the problem. So what the problem is the standard cheek piece is too high to use standard mounts with. Now these ones that I've had to mount on the rifle are Vortex extra highs. So there's an awful lot of gap between the Picatinny rail and the scope itself. And when I first mounted the scope and using normal height mounts, what I had to do was take the cheek piece off entirely. What this did was allow me to get my eye further down in the rifle and actually see through the scope. Being a pick rail, it's obviously not that comfortable to put your cheek on. Really quite cold, and after a while you do tend to get lines imprinted in your face. And the second thing in regards to the Picatinny on the top here is that you are limited in the length of scope you can use. This rail is really quite good for shorter eye relief scopes, but anything that requires a longer eye relief you're going to struggle with getting the scope forward enough to use. That being said, I was trying to mount a Vortex Diamondback Tactical 24 magnification scope on this, so I probably was being a little unreasonable. And this rifle I think would really shine with a pard put on top of it. But having said that, you're probably not going to be mounting a super high magnification target scope on this, so that most likely isn't going to be a problem. Right then, so I've brought you down nice and close and I just want to show you something else. This is only the second week that I've been shooting the rifle, and as you can see there's already some wears and chips in the finish. Now both times I've taken this rifle out it's been in a soft padded case, so it's not like it's been rattling around in the back of the van. So the finish is definitely not as hardy as some of the other rifles we have, but again this is quite a minor problem, but it's one I thought I'd point out. Right then, so the final little thing I want to say is in regards to the barrel. Now I've already stripped this rifle, had a good poke around inside, and I'm fairly pleased with how it is inside. There are a couple little marks and the finishing on the block isn't perfect, but again it is a more budget orientated rifle and I am comparing it to the very top upper echelon of air rifles. So I'm pointing these things out, but I'm not necessarily slagging the rifle off because it is at the end of the day a lower end rifle which works, shoots and holds air straight out the box. Which, if I'm honest, isn't always the case with even the very high end rifles. But the one thing that did let this rifle down is the way that the transfer port in the barrel has been finished. I'll get you some close-up shots when we do the full strip down, but the short version is where the transfer port had been drilled or milled in the barrel. It left a really big burr on the inside of the barrel, and what was happening was when you was cocking the rifle and feeding the pellet into the barrel, one side of the pellet was being scraped off by the burr inside the transfer port. Having said that though, even with the big burr inside the barrel it was shooting pretty good at the closer ranges. Right then, so that's going to about do it for this one guys. The next video you see on the Akela will probably be a strip down, an install of the regulator and then a rebuild, and we'll probably polish the barrel a little more and do a little more to the internals of the rifle. What I'm hoping to do with this rifle is do it in stages, so you can see what exactly each of the steps does to the rifle. So in the first one we just shot it as it came out of the box, then gave it a light overhaul, just rebuilt it with the right greases in the right places and removed the burr on the inside of the barrel. We did give the barrel a little polish, but I'll go over that more thoroughly in the rebuild video. And as you can see, we're already on the right track. We've got steady improvements already, and hopefully if we keep on we'll get more shots, a more accurate rifle, and hopefully we'll be able to make it as good as a high-end rifle. Right then guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.